Welcome to the Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast, where our team talks with top leaders about how to better serve and lead your team. Our goal is for you to gain tangible tips on topics such as culture, leadership, succession, and navigating people problems. We hope you enjoy today's show.
Well, welcome back to the Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast. I am Kristin Fry. I'm one of our executive consultants on the team. And today I'm having a conversation with Adam Erlichman, who is the founder of an organization called Build Groups. He also recently, or somewhat recently, wrote a manual called Group Leader Training. And the subtitle, I think, is really interesting and paints a lot of, color to the bigger picture of what that is, but it is a biblical manual for small group leaders and teachers in the local church. So, Adam, I look forward to having this conversation with you. I would love, before we even just get started, for you to say, who are you? Where do you live? How did you found Build Groups? Where did that even come from? What does that mean? So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristin. Really excited to be on here with y'all and share. And a little bit about me. And I always got to lead with this, especially because I live in Texas. I was born in Pennsylvania, grew up there. I'm a Yankee living in the promised land of Texas. And so, grew up with my youth there, became a Christian at 19 at Liberty University, Lynchburg, Virginia, met my wife there. And, was called to ministry at 21. And so my wife, Anna, we've got 3 boys, Judah, Titus, and Deacon, 10, 8, and 6 years of age, rough, tough, tumbling, high energy, wild, just sweet boys, and a blessing. I love being their dad. It's fun. And so we're active and moving and going. And I've served in youth, young adult ministry, adult groups and discipleship, executive level ministry as well. And so that's a little bit about me, my background. I live in Dallas area, kind of East Dallas, Texas. Okay. And so that's just a little bit about me. Yeah.
So where did Build Groups come from?
Yeah. So that wasn't something I sought to start or had this inclination or desire within me. I had gone on staff at a church as a groups pastor. And I was like, man, what conference could I take my lay group leaders to? And I'm in Dallas, right? This is like the mecca of conferences for Christian conference.
Yes.
And I was looking, I was like, man, there's nothing there. There's nothing on the weekends. It's always Monday through Friday. The conference ends at 5 p.m. when everyone gets off work. So I said, well, look, let's just do our own thing. And we did our own sort of formatted conference, and I trained some of our leaders who were coaches of group leaders to lead breakout sessions. And we did that on a Saturday. It went really well. The next year we did it. Like a dozen other churches through word of mouth said, hey, we want to come be a part of this. And I said, hey, come on, man, the more the merrier. And then the next year we said, all right, well, let's open this up and see. And then we had more than 50 other churches from around the country showing up to come to small little rural town for this conference just north of Dallas. And So when that begins to happen and you have this conference, people go, oh, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about, which isn't always true, but it has worked out. Right. And so Build Groups started from there. It's been around for 4 years and helping consult churches and groups and discipleship ministries and other aspects as well. There's more that we do, but the bread and butter of what got it going, started, really established and launched was consulting and helping churches and groups and discipleship ministries.
Okay. So then is that, I'm assuming, how the idea of group leader training then was birthed? Is that like, how did group leader training come to fruition?
Yeah, that is such a great question. So I was writing it before I ever realized that I was writing it. There are so many great resources out there in the groups ministry world from, all different types of people. And so there's a lot of books that I read out there. I was like, man, this is good. This is good. And some were really good with best practices. Some were really good, like theologically. Some were really good, like at a heart level and, interpersonal relationships and, community building. And I said, man, I would really like a book that has all of those just jammed together, right? And a training that had all that. And so we started doing our own training with our own leaders. And through doing that, I started writing this, not realizing I was writing it. And there was a distinct moment, though, Kristin, like I remember like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my office. I jumped on a Zoom call with a church planter, and he was asking about groups. I was just kind of coaching him through some groups ministry stuff. And long story short, we get to the end. I'm telling about our training and what we do. And, our groups ministry, it doubled every year for 6 years. It was amazing what God
wow.
did. And, at a sizable church. And so he's like, well, can you send me the training in writing? And I said, I don't have it in writing. It's in my head and my heart. And I got some bullet points that won't make any sense to you. And there was just a whole damper on the call. Like it ended and we hung up, and I looked at the ceiling of my office. I was like, all right, Lord, you want me to write a book. And so, that was more than 6 years ago now. And it took 6 years to write. It was the first book I began writing, but it was the fifth book I published. If that tells you anything, it was a labor of love, a field study of 6 years of over 1,000 group leaders. We took through that and gathered data and responses. And so the whole, resource, it was really written out of a practitioner's mindset of what are group leaders actually facing at ground level. And then speaking into those. So
that's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting because you just said 6 years. That's a very long time. And a lot of conversations, over 1,000 leaders is not a small number. So what were the common denominators that came from all of that?
Yeah, there was a lot of things that I learned through that process. There were, there's some micro data that I could probably share with you, like specific questions we have in the training that really opened up. And, so I'll give you one as an example, but before I want to give you kind of a macro. One of the macro things that we learned was people were far more willing to lead a group if there was a clear pathway of how to start, be developed, and then a plan to deploy them. Right. And that's a large part of what I help churches do is how do you discover, develop, and deploy new leaders and volunteers. Right. And so if that was in place and there was a plan and you could communicate that clearly, they were much more willing to do it. Even though I had a guy, I sat across the table from him, was like, man, would you go through our leader training? And he goes, I'll go through it, but I'm never going to be a leader. And, today that guy 6 years later started a group, multiplied his group 6 times, and now coaches, 10 different group leaders. Right. That was one of the macro, but a micro was we would ask the question, like, what's one healthy quality of a group? And so we go in a circle, everyone answers with one, transparency, biblical, authentic, caring, and plenty of other answers. But there were 4 common responses that we never heard, and over like 1,500 different responses. And so some of those responses, or of those 4 responses, it was very telling about what people thought groups were supposed to be and what they were supposed to do and what outcomes they could expect from group. And what was very clear was that growth mindset was not at the forefront of most group leaders' mind.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was more about support and care, and it was less about progress. It was less about transformation. It was more about transparency. Hey, let's be open. Let's be honest. Let's be genuine. Let's be authentic. But it stopped there. And so the very uncommon answers that we did not hear were answers like, one quality of a healthy group is repentance. Another healthy, quality of a healthy group is that we correct one another, admonish. Grace, that we have grace towards one another. Or the fourth one was growth or transformation. Those were responses that we almost never heard, maybe one or two times. And so what that told us was, hey, we have half of it right? Like transparency, acceptance, like you have to have that, but it can't stop there. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay there. We need to move forward. We need to progress. And so that was some of the things that we learned through that season and the 6 years of putting that together.
The most expensive hire you'll ever make is the wrong hire. Use our free Bad Hire Calculator tool to see how much a bad hire could really cost your organization. Go to vanderbloemen.com/resources to try it out.
Gosh, that's so fascinating. So you said something which makes me think of another question. Why is training group leaders so important to the future growth of the church and current health of the church?
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I don't know if you could have asked a better question, Kristin. That's like, I love that question, right? So why groups matter, right? Why do they matter? A lot of churches, I think, view groups in an improper place and in error. They refer to them as, hey, groups are going to help us close the back door. Close the back door of the church so people don't leave. We need to retain them. And in reality, groups aren't the back door. They're the elevator that takes your church to new heights you didn't know were possible. Groups are the tide that raise all ministry ships in your church. So if you want a stronger kids ministry, you want a stronger student ministry, any ministry you can think of, like groups is that tide that raises all of it up. Because if you have people who are in there, intentionally being spiritually formed in the image of Christ, and they're done with quality and intentional processes and training and development, and you start to see that flow out into the other places, because the people who are in there are parents, a lot of them, and those parents have kids in kids ministry. Those parents have teenagers in student ministry, and so it just overflows in so many different ways, and it really affects and increases many other metrics. And that's what I've seen at multiple churches. And that's, there's fruit that's come out of that into other ministry areas you just wouldn't otherwise see.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay. So for someone listening right now thinking, yeah, you are speaking to me right now. My church is in a spot where we're not great with our groups. We're not in a great spot. We kind of put half of our attention towards them. Some seasons we're a little bit more focused than other seasons. We don't have the resources. We don't have the staff devoted to it. Fill in the blank for whatever reason, might fit for their context. So you have this resource, group leader training. So talk to us about, how is that even supposed to be used, or what does that even look like for a church to adopt that and use that? Practically walk us through group leader training.
Certainly. Yeah. So there are churches who have a full, adult group staff that use this resource, and it's very beneficial for them. But what I had in mind a lot of through the process in putting this together was this resource being a tool that was turnkey for a staff or a church, even a solo pastor or a church planter that didn't have the full-time groups guy on staff, right? They didn't have that person to just lose sleep about it overnight and own that ministry. And so the way that this resource is designed to help, and the way that we've modeled it, and I help other churches do this, is, hey guys, let's not be reactive in groups ministry where we go, oh man, it's January, it's peak season. We need to find some leaders and start groups in 2 weeks, and then try to microwave that whole, group leader training experience and launch them. And then we wonder why did we lose 60% of our groups going into the next semester? And so really what the hope is through this training is that we crockpot that process. We slow it down. We're proactive. We really spread that out over, instead of, hey, let's jam this into 2, 3, 4 weeks, and let's spread that over 5 months. let's make this meaningful, and let's justify a process where people, when they go through, they see that we've invested time into it. We've given them time to consider, to pray about it, to see if, man, is this something God's calling me to? Like, I think the primary role of a pastor in ways, right, equipping the saints to do the work of ministry, Ephesians 4:11 and 12, groups ministry is a vital place, and I think a prime place to allow people to exercise their gifts and play that out. And so when you give someone a 3, 4, 5 month, and that might be, hey, we're just going to meet once a month for 2 hours. Like, we're not going to burn you out before you ever start leading. Right. And, the staff person or the pastor probably enjoys that way more too, spreading that out.
Right.
You get a front row seat to see them explore a call to possibly lead, and to step into a space that they may have never believed that they could. And they needed a little bit more. And I like how Robbie Gallaty says this, they need a little bit more Godfidence, right, in their life. To just believe, like, hey, God could use me in this way. And the life stories of transformation and people's lives that are touched through them saying yes, it's incredible.
Wow. Do you have an example or a story or two about actual real life churches that have adopted group leader training, sort of the success story? How has this transformed or changed or encouraged a church who has adopted this and started applying some of these principles and this training within their church?
Yeah. So I can give you probably macro examples of just like metrics, right, that would say to that. And then there's,
yes.
Micro examples, obviously, too, of just stories of, I think the quantity is important to measure, but also the quality of just immeasurable spiritual value that's being added, where you've got the single mother who's moving out of a home because she got saved a year ago, and through a group and a community she's belonged to, they've helped show her that, man, you want to be wedded. You don't want to be out of wedlock living with a man. And so taking that repentant next step to step out, and having no one there on move out day. And then, man, the group shows up, helps move, not just advise you should do this, but walks through that. One of the hardest moments of single mother's life. Right. And so there's that example. There's so many examples. I remember I was sitting down at a Fuzzy's Taco, and I was talking to a guy, and his group leader had told me, hey, I think this guy would be an incredible group leader. I said, I agree. I'm going to go get lunch. I'm going to talk with them. And so I sit down. I said, hey, your group leader thinks that you'd be a great future new group leader because of this, this, and this. And then he begins to choke in his taco, and he's like, oh man, that makes me really uncomfortable that you just said that. Right. And, but I know God wants me to get uncomfortable. So like, I'm open to this. And so I got a front row seat to watch the Holy Spirit, like, move and convict and make him uncomfortable to say yes to the calling God had put in his life that he wasn't aware of yet. Right. And so you get to see people become more than what they realize that they could be. And another instance, like a dad who had just been disengaged, not involved in church, and joined a group, took 2 years to get him into a group. He gets into a group, he's going, and then like a month in, he's now leading family devotions with his family, at dinner time, and like total 180. And that's the power of groups, right?
Wow. Right.
So that's some of the macro level, the metric stuff you would see, right? With the way that we do groups, because groups are not just about fellowship and study. Groups are a prime place to mobilize people into action, into service, into sharing their faith. And that's what Jesus did, right? He a step of discipleship was moving his disciples into service. And so we train group leaders to do that. So in our resource, that's one of the 5 sessions is we train group leaders. How do you mobilize people to activate their gifts and begin using them? How to use a group begin to share your faith? How do you guys as a team or as a community begin to be evangelistic and not just sit in a seat and learn your Bible for 10, 15, 20 years, but that you go actually live it out? Right. So, but yeah, those are some of the examples of what we've seen come out of that. Yeah.
Wow. I agree with you. There's just something so powerful that happens when we get into intentional community, the way that God changes us, the way our hearts expand for God, for people, for the people in our context, and then kind of on the periphery. There's just something very, very powerful about how God has wired us in the context of relationships, and relationships matter. And so I love that you are training churches and group leaders to walk toward intentional relationships and connection, really. And it made me think of a question while you were talking. What, in your opinion, do you think is the biggest barrier or hesitancy for churches who were a little bit on the fence of going all in with groups and, for whatever reason? But what do you think prevents churches from really taking that step toward building this healthy framework of small groups within their church?
Trust. It comes down to trust. You go back to the Protestant Reformation, even Martin Luther, he had a vision to equip home group leaders. And because of the movement and the potential of losing the influence he needed to move the Protestant Reformation forward, he cut that. He said, we're not going to risk it. That could get us some bad publicity, And so for churches today, and just for context, I work with churches who have hybrid models, on-campus groups, off-campus groups, mid-sized groups, small groups. And so, whether that's a Sunday school or that's, life group, whatever you want to call them. I work with all of those. And so what I see most often, whether it's on or off campus, but especially for off campus, because there's a higher level of trust that's required, it really comes down to trust. Are we willing to release people to live out their calling and to live out the gifting God has woven into them and put into them, to let that? Are we willing to take the time, one, to help cultivate and develop those things to get into a place where they can be trustworthy? And so with group leader training, in our 5-month process, we do 5 sessions over 5 months, but churches can do whatever timeline they want with the 5 sessions in the workbook. What we say is, if we invest a lot on the front end, we can have a lot of trust on the back end. And that also really increased our retention rate of the amount of group leaders that came back the next season. We would only have about 2% loss or, churn, if you will, of our group leaders from semester to semester to semester. And that's significant for the longevity and the health of a group's ministry that builds a culture, which, it's good to have strategy, but as said many times, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
If you have people who are in this for the long haul, that's huge. And so for pastors and for staff, and I empathize with elders and staff. There have been instances at different churches where it wasn't totally thought out and a lot of freedom was given to groups, and you get some messes, man. I mean, and so it's important to have an intentional investment on the front end to prevent a mess on the back end. But I would say this is, they are dangerous. Groups are very dangerous. They can be, to forces of darkness, to Satan, to sin. And at the end of the day, if you're willing to have an intentional investment process up front and begin to be proactive, it's worth the risk. I mean, the reward is so high, and I could just sit and tell people for hours why it is worth it. So yeah, that's what I see as a roadblock, and there's plenty of ways to get past that and into just, all that God intended for this to be, just the beauty of it.
Have you seen churches that were maybe sitting in that seat that were hesitant, and there was that one thing that sort of tipped them over the edge of, okay, we'll just take a step toward giving this a shot, and then seeing that sort of open up the floodgates to a world that they never even thought possible? I mean, I'm assuming that you've experienced that working with churches. Is that sort of a fair assumption?
100%. Yeah, that's fair. And I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you. So, so generally when I go to work with a church or we consult them, the expectation is we're going to increase your volunteer base or your group leader base by 30 to 50%. And we say that because that's what.
Oh, that's a good percentage.
Oh, it's life-changing for most churches. It is a game changer. Whether you're, a kids minister, kids director, or a group's pastor, director. I mean, you go, man, hey, how would it change your world if you added 30 to 50% more volunteers or leaders? And that's what we do again and again and again through this process where we help them discover, develop, and deploy potential new volunteers and leaders. And we help them custom build that for their context in their church. And, we've got the resources, obviously, that undergird and help a lot of that too. So, to answer that question, we see that it can make a significant impact. It can make a big difference of moving that needle and them go, well, if you're telling me this is what my world could be, then yes, let's take those steps. And you just start to see a total mentality shift. You see a paradigm break in a good way into a new place that they get to begin ministering, not out of desperation of, hey, come jump on this ministry ship that is sinking and on fire because we don't have enough.
Yes.
We don't have enough people. We need more people. Say it from the stage again, please, Pastor, put in the announcement. Instead, we operate from a full bench of so many people who are ready to jump in, and they enjoy it far more. They love to do the ministry far more, these leaders and volunteers, because they're not desperate and they're not in a scarcity mindset. They're not at a scarcity of slots being filled to service in. And so, when you paint some of that picture and people start to see that happening, it changes a lot in a good way.
Gosh, I bet. Well, group leader training is such a needed resource. So thank you, number one, for writing it. Thank you for having this conversation. And before we wrap up, how can people connect with you? What if someone is listening and they want to learn more about Build Groups? What if someone is listening and they think, gosh, yes, group leader training is what we need. How do they get it?
Yes. So it is available on Amazon. And as of just this month, we now have bulk order options on our website. So buildgroups.net. You can go there, buildgroups.net. You can email me, Adam at buildgroups.net. And we can, get you all hooked up, get you all those resources. We do up to 50% discount for bulk orders off of the list price that you'll see there. And so I mean, and if in a consulting side of things or whatever, if it's not just the resource, my cell phone number's 434-444-6376. And some people say I'm crazy to do this, but I just did that. So we're good. But buildgroups.net, get it on Amazon, go to our website, email Adam at buildgroups.net, or you can shoot me a text message. So yeah.
Perfect. Bold move, giving out your phone number. Bold move.
We'll see how that goes.
Thank you. Yeah. You can report back later and let us know about that. But thank you for having this conversation. I really appreciate it. I think it's valuable and helpful. So thank you for taking time.
Absolutely, Kristin. Thanks for having me on. I love talking about. I could go on forever, and so thanks for just giving me a little bit of time to share my heart, my love, and passion of just wanting to see the church do and cultivate more of this. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast. At Vanderbloemen, we help organizations build their best teams through hiring, succession, culture, compensation, and diversity solutions. Visit our website, Vanderbloemen.com, to learn more and subscribe to our Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to keep up with our latest episodes. Thanks for listening.